Well, hello, Jess Montgomery here, and I'm excited that today on Tea with Jess, we have a special guest, Hannah Mary McKinnon, and ignore my not great bookmark, but obviously I've been loving and reading Sister Dear, so we're going to talk about that today, and about, you know, all kinds of things about writing with Hannah. So thank you so much for being here with us.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Thank you. Oh, have a glass of water. Oh,
we'll give each other a little toast.
Yes, yes.
A virtual toast.
Let me remedy that. Here we go. Cheers.
Cheers.
I've had my 2 cups of tea today, so that's my cutoff limit.
There you go. That's probably wise. Well, congratulations on your 4th book.
Thank you. Yes, look, snap.
Aw, look at us. That's wonderful. So congratulations. What's it been like to promote a book in the midst of lockdown? I know you've gotten creative, such as with First Chapter Fun. So tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. First Chapter Fun was actually born on middle of March, when with a few writer friends we were messaging on Facebook and freaking out about the fact that we had books coming out during the pandemic and things were starting to shut down or continue. We were eyeing Europe and seeing basically what was in store for us. And I half jokingly said, well, what if I read a chapter of your book on Facebook Live and Instagram Live, thinking that maybe half a dozen or maybe a dozen authors would allow me to go ahead with this craziness. And within 2 days, I had over 40 authors lined up, turned into 53 days in a row of readings every day at 11:30. And it was great because it was a brilliant distraction for me. Selfishly, I was able to just forget about the whole COVID and just because I was so busy doing graphics and preparing and rehearsing and stuff. And it was also good for other authors because it gave them an opportunity to promote their books in a different way, in a way that we hadn't really seen before, I guess, or not much on social media. So that continued for 53 days until May the 8th. And before then, a couple of weeks in, I spoke with Hank Philippi Ryan, a fellow crime author. And she said, so what's going on with First Chapter Fun? You know, are you going to stop afterwards or what are you doing? I said, well, I can't read every day. It's my publisher expects me to write books, so I can't continue daily. But it is kind of fun, but I'm probably going to stop. I'm not really sure. And she didn't twist my arm very much or very hard, but she said, what if you had a partner and what if we read twice a week, Tuesdays and Thursdays? So tea with the days with a tea with Hannah and Hank. And so we created our own First Chapter Fun group, which has over 1,100 members already.
Yeah, that's amazing.
And on Instagram. And now we read Tuesdays and Thursdays, and we're scheduling authors into January now, January 2021.
Yes, and I've benefited from you having read from The Widows, yes. And you're going to read from The Hollows, so I'm very excited about it. And it is fun to tune in, but I got to tell you, my to be read pile was already staggering. Now it just keeps growing. But
Same.
It's wonderful.
Same. Yeah, same, because I read all these opening chapters and think, okay, off to Goodreads, and yes, want to read. It's getting ridiculous, but it's been really, really fun. And both publishers and authors, such as yourself, have been so generous to allow us to do this and introduce. The whole aim was initially to beat the COVID blues.
Right.
To provide a distraction every day, same time you can tune in and forget about everything else. And that has now really, it's gained momentum, but also we want to bring authors who are new to readers, or maybe books that they're anticipating that readers are looking forward to, because we read ones that are coming out, ones that are already out, and ones that have been out for a while. So it's really a fun way to introduce viewers to books in a different way.
Yeah, it's brilliant, and I've enjoyed it as a reader for
Oh,
sure. So let's talk a little bit more about Sister Dear. So here's how I would summarize your theme. I call it it's this, like a theme of family secrets and how discovering them, I don't want to give too much away, but how discovering them can change how we view ourselves and our place in the world, which is right up my alley. I mean, checks all the boxes that I love. So and I haven't read your previous work yet. I'm reading Sister Dear, but I get the sense that that's a theme that kind of flows through your work. And what are your thoughts on the thematic background of your books?
It definitely does. I mean, in all of my books, even my first one, which was a rom-com, my one and only rom-com, Time After Time, my
With a great
Groundhog
premise,
Day.
by the way.
Say that again, sorry.
A great premise. I
Oh.
was reading about it earlier today, and I thought, oh, now that's fun.
Yeah.
Add it to the Goodreads pile.
I call that one the love child of the movies Groundhog Day and Sliding Doors. Really.
Right. I mean, perfect.
Yeah, I love those movies. So, I mean, even in that one, there are secrets, and how decisions and potentially secrets can affect your life and those of others.
Mm-hmm.
And that really is a theme in all of them. It's what I try and do is take quite ordinary people but put them in extraordinary circumstances and really difficult situations, and then see how they manage that, because everybody would manage a particular situation differently. And it is you're right, it's spot on. It's what is the effect of secrets and lies and deceit within a family that can span generations potentially. Yeah. Certainly in The Neighbours it did, but also in Sister Dear. And what is the impact on whom? How does that all connect? And I have a lovely family. I have to say that. And, my mom is great, my dad is great, my sister's lovely. This is not based on personal experience at all. But I find it quite fascinating how within families, sometimes the most despicable acts are carried out, and why that would be, and how that affects you even a generation or two later.
Yeah, it's fascinating, and you make it so page turning.
Oh, thank you.
Which makes me wonder a couple questions along those lines. So you do write very page turning work, but also these deep secrets and how that impacts your characters. So do you start with plot? Do you start with characters? How does that interplay work out in your development of your identity?
Well, generally, so Sister Dear specifically, the idea came when I was driving one of my kids somewhere, and there was a piece on the news about a woman who'd found a wedding ring at a playground, and she was trying to find the rightful owner through social media.
Yeah.
And any normal person would go, that's so lovely. Meanwhile, the thriller brain goes, that's so lovely. What if she discovers that the person who the owner of the ring has a much better life, and gets jealous and starts stalking her, and all these, things, to just start going down that rabbit hole. And that was the idea for it. So it was the what if that came first, and then it was really the characters. It was, well, okay, so, and the ring does feature in it, not in the way I just described, but the ring is in there. And I remember thinking, well, who is this character, and why is she so jealous, and what has happened to her, and kind of noodle her around. I knew it was going to be a woman. I knew it was going to be one point of view. I knew where she was at the beginning of the story and the end. And then as I developed her, the plot came along as well. So it's almost as if they go hand in hand, really. I find the idea comes first, and it is a very small, just a tiny idea generally, nothing fully formed, but something that I can then build around. And then as I think about the character, the plot comes because I can figure out what they would do and how they would act and what the consequences of their actions would be. So it's a combination, really, I think.
Yeah. So one kind of infuses the other.
Yes.
Yeah. And did you get like a visceral, I always say I get like this visceral in that moment of catching an idea or the idea catching me. It sounds like you do too.
Yeah, and I can, up until now, I know that some authors, they don't like answering necessarily the question of where did the inspiration come from, because they're not sure, it just kind of happened. But I remember for each of my books how and where it came from. And I don't know why that is, maybe, and I have had other ideas, but
Sure.
it's the ones that stick with me, the ones that won't let me go. And this one came about when I was writing, I must have been writing Her Secret Son, or maybe even before. So last year's book, even before that. And I just had this idea, and it just wouldn't, this woman at this playground who was jealous, who had this ring, and what is going on? And she just wouldn't leave me alone. And that's when I know that I have something to work with. If the idea just if I forget about it, well, then obviously it wasn't the right one, or I didn't write it down and it was a great idea. Who knows? There went that New York Times best-selling list.
The one that got away.
Yes, but I wouldn't know because I didn't write it. But that's generally how that works. You know, the ideas that won't let me go. And often, actually, I have an idea, not for next year's book, not for the one after, but for 2023, because the other two are already plotted, either done or plotted. And we were watching a program, and I looked at my husband and I went, oh, that's going to be book 7. What if? And he just looked at me and he said, where does this come from? And I have no idea. It just does.
That's how a writer brain works. Yeah. So you mentioned that many people hearing this story would have just gone, oh, and then moved on. But obviously your thriller brain kicked in. So I'm curious, what brought you to writing thrillers? Is that a genre you've always loved reading, or why the thriller genre? I mean, why not, obviously?
Well, so I used to read thrillers when I was a kid, or a teenager, not a kid.
You were 5 reading thrillers.
Yeah, the very scary caterpillar. No.
I love that.
That might be a good one. Soft.
Not a bad idea.
Anyway. So I used to read thrillers as a teenager. I read a ton of them and I really liked them. But then in my early 20s, a good friend of mine died in very, very tragic circumstances, very nasty circumstances. And I couldn't touch thrillers anymore. I just couldn't bring myself to read stuff where people died. It was just too hard. Right. And so I read an awful lot of women's fiction, I guess, or rom-coms and happy stuff, stuff where still stuff happened with depth and whatnot, but ultimately where there was a happy ending and people didn't die necessarily. And then I wrote my first book, and it was a rom-com. And as that one was being subbed out to publishers by my agent, I had the idea for the second one, and I immediately knew it was darker. And I remembered my love of thrillers, and I thought, I feel this need to write gritty, dark, complex characters. Not that they're not in rom-coms and stuff, but just where there are more secrets and all that, as we were talking about before. And I was at the library, picked up a book that I hadn't heard of before, Creep by Jennifer Hillier, who happens to now live in the same town, and we're friends, and really quite funny. And it gave me permission, A, and B, that shove that I needed to make the neighbors darker. So I had this gap where I didn't really read thrillers, but my love for them never went away. And now I'm firmly in the thriller domestic suspense camp.
That's neat.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sorry about that tragic experience with your friend. But it's neat that you've been able to reclaim that love of your genre.
Yes.
That you loved as when you were reading The Very Scary Caterpillar. Oh my. So this is kind of like the plot or characters question. Writers always talk about, are you a a plotter or a pantser, and I think we're all both. And I think people just fall somewhere on the continuum at the beginning of a project, and ultimately by the end, we've all, plotted and pantsed and pulled our hair out.
Yes. Oh,
Stuck
yes.
it back in, all that good stuff. So at least at the beginning of a project, where do you think you fall on the plotting or pantsing continuum?
I am a heavy, heavy plotter.
Ah, yes, my
Yes.
people.
Yes, I've always been more of a plotter, but well, probably a plantser, somewhere in the middle. I'd plot, and then I'd get bored of plotting, and then I'd write, and then I'd hit a wall, and I'd go back to plotting, and then
Right.
I'd write again, and kind of vary between the two. But now I found actually with Sister Dear, not next year's book, but the one after, are the two that I've plotted the most.
Mhm.
And I just things change. I mean, I have a completely detailed plot, and I know not everything that's going to happen, because then I would have written the book already. But I know the big stepping stones and the bigger and some smaller plot points too. It's all plotted out, and I just find that gives me the security that I know where I'm going. It's like having a roadmap. If I'm going to go on a road trip, unless it's just, we'll see where we end up and have fun wherever we get to, that's fine. But when you have a deadline, or when I have a deadline, that fills me with dread. Just, I have an idea. I'm just going to write and see where it goes. Well, what if it doesn't go anywhere?
Yeah.
What if my deadline comes and goes and I just haven't got anything because I've been meandering around, lost in the wilderness,
Right.
So I do plot. But when I write my first skeleton draft, I don't even call it first draft, my skeleton draft that's based on the plot that I've written. It's very loose, it's very basic, there's not many descriptions, there's not a lot of dialogue tags, characters are very wooden, not very emotional or anything. But it gives me a better idea and a good understanding of whether what I've plotted is actually going to work. And even then, after that, I still change stuff. And then my editor says change stuff too. So,
Sure. Yeah, it's a
but
process.
yes, I plot. So you plot too, then?
I do. I always feel like I have to think I know the ending. And then, of course, I get, 50 pages from the end and realize, oh, no, that's not
Exactly.
who done it. And that's not how it's going to end. And, but I think that's kind of exciting. And
Yes.
I have to really think about, and that's why I was interested about the characters and plot. And it is this sort of back and forth negotiation, if you will, in your own brain as you're creating a story. But I really like to feel I know what's the emotional arc going to be. Now, like you, I don't even call my first draft a first draft. I call it a raw draft.
Yes.
Because it's very raw, and the characters, and I write a series, and so I know several of the characters really well. But even so, they start out so wooden and stiff, and they're like, I mean, stick figures would be complimenting how they come across on
Yes.
the page.
Yes. You got to moving them from A to B, and
Yes.
it's telling yourself the story, really. I think with
Yeah.
the raw draft, it's figuring out whether what you've thought through works or not, and then as we layer and we write, that's when they become real people. Well,
Yeah.
I mean, real, you know what I mean?
Yeah, they start to lift off the page, is how I always
Yes.
put it. Like they're you're not just giving stage direction. They lift off the
Yes,
page and
exactly.
become, thinking, feeling people. And yeah, it's weird to try to describe the process, but
It is. Well, I always thought well, before I started writing, I always thought I imagined authors would just get up in the morning and then sit down, and words would just flow, and they would write the end and they'd be done. It's not like
yes,
that at all. Well,
no,
nobody I mean, I'm sure there are some outliers out there
yeah,
who work that way, but all of the authors I've spoken to, and there have been many, they've said, oh no, the first draft, or the raw draft, or skeleton draft, or whatever we want to call it. Even people who write chapter and then edit, and then chapter 2 and then edit. They
Mhm.
still have a raw draft of chapter 1 that they go over multiple times before they move on. So
Oh yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
it's yes, that illusion was shattered, and I'm glad, because I thought maybe I was weird.
Nope, I don't think so. So you've referenced a couple times next year's book and next year's book and an idea for 2023, which is
Oh,
exciting. So what can you tell us about what you're working on? I know, you probably don't want to tell us about the 2023 book, but what can we look forward to next year?
well, next year's book is another thriller, of course.
Mhm.
So that one is the story of a man who wakes up on a beach. He doesn't know who he is. He doesn't know why he's there. And when he manages to find his way back home, which isn't anywhere near the beach, he realizes that he abandoned the place 2 years prior, and some people suspect him of murder. And of course, he has no idea, did he? Didn't he? And who are these people and why? So that's next
Mm,
year's.
that's
And then 2022 is a little bit early, and 2023 is even just a little what if, a
sure.
tiny idea. But that's next year's book, so it'll be another spring book. I don't think COVID is going to push back the plans, as far as I know, but so it should be around May-ish again.
Okay.
Yeah.
By then we'll all have a vaccine.
Oh, I hope so.
Yeah, me
Yes,
too.
please.
Yes, please. Okay, well, I'm going to wrap us up in a minute, but tell us, is there anything else you'd like us to know about Sister Dear, this year's book? Because everybody should go out and get it and buy it, read it.
Well, thank you. I'll do the elevator pitch then, in that case,
Okay.
because that's real quick.
Okay.
So, Sister Dear is a story about half siblings, half sisters, who don't know that the other one exists until one of them finds out, and she realizes that her half sister has and is everything she could only ever dream of. And so she decides to infiltrate her sister's life without telling her they're related. Da da
Mm.
da.
Da, da, da. That's perfect. That's a perfect description. I love it. Well,
Thank you.
thank you. Thank you so much for chatting with me this
Oh, it's
afternoon.
my pleasure. Thank you, Jess.
No, you're very welcome. And thank you to everyone who tuned in or who's watching later. Next week, Tea with Jess will be me reading a humorous essay that I wrote a while back because why not?
Absolutely. We all need some humor these
We
days
all need
anyway,
some
right?
humor. Absolutely. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate you
Thank
being with
you.
me. All righty.